The private jet touched down at midnight, its wheels screeching softly against the tarmac of the nearly empty airstrip. Alexander Grant, billionaire CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, had not planned on being here tonight. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 weeks. His schedule was packed with international meetings, investors waiting in Shanghai, and charity boards calling for his presence. Yet something inside him, an ache he couldn't shake, drove him to cancel everything and return quietly, unannounced. He told no one, not his driver, not his board, not even the staff at the mansion who ran his estate like clockwork. For years, his life had been about control, about precision, about keeping his empire running with the efficiency of a machine. But tonight he felt a hollow ache in his chest that no boardroom triumph could fill. His 7-year-old son, Matthew, was at the heart of it. Since his wife's passing 4 years ago, Alexander had buried himself in work. It was easier to face endless deadlines and billions in acquisitions than to face the small boy who looked so much like her, same dark eyes, same way of tilting his head when curious, same laughter that once filled Alexander with warmth and now only tore open the wounds of grief. He told himself he was being responsible, that he was securing Matthew's future, that the boy had everything he could possibly need: private tutors, the best schools, a home staffed with people to attend to him. But in the quiet of his hotel suites, Alexander's conscience whispered a different truth: his son had everything except a father. That gnawing guilt had finally dragged him back here. He wanted to see his boy. He wanted, though he couldn't admit it aloud, to see if Matthew even remembered how to smile around him. Pulling his coat tighter, Alexander stepped out of the sleek black car he had driven himself from the airport. The mansion loomed before him, its grand pillars lit faintly by the garden lamps. Normally, when he returned, the staff lined up in polished rows, ready to greet him. Tonight, it was silent. Unannounced arrivals had a strange magic about them. They stripped away performance and showed life as it truly was. He slipped inside with his key, the heavy oak door shutting quietly behind him. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cinnamon. For a moment, he thought the house was asleep, until he caught a faint glow coming from down the hall, the playroom. Frowning, Alexander moved closer. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Why would Matthew be awake? And then he froze. Through the doorway, lit softly by a lamp, he saw his son sitting cross-legged on the carpet, pajamas wrinkled, hair sticking out in tufts. Across from him sat Rosa, the maid. She was young, no more than 25, her dark hair braided simply down her back, her uniform apron dusted with flour as if she had rushed here straight from the kitchen. But it wasn't the sight of her presence that stopped Alexander cold, it was what she was doing. Rosa had spread out Matthew's toys and was holding 2 action figures in her hands. She was giving them voices, exaggerating their gestures, making the boy laugh so hard his little shoulders shook. Between bursts of giggles, Matthew leaned into her, safe and unguarded in a way Alexander had not seen in years. And then, quietly, without drama, Matthew rested his head on Rosa's lap. She brushed his hair from his forehead with a tenderness so instinctive it seemed like second nature. "Tell me another one," Matthew mumbled sleepily. "All right," Rosa whispered, her accent lilting softly. "But only if you promise to close your eyes." Alexander's throat tightened. He had walked into boardrooms with presidents and billionaires. Without blinking, he had faced down financial storms worth billions without a bead of sweat. But watching his son, his own son, find comfort in the lap of a maid, he could barely breathe. Something twisted inside him: jealousy, regret, awe. He couldn't name it. He had expected to find his staff asleep, his house in order, his son perhaps tucked away by a nanny. Instead, he found a young maid giving the one thing all his wealth had failed to provide: love. For a long moment, he simply stood there, hidden in the shadows, unsure if he had the right to interrupt. But then Matthew stirred, blinking his tired eyes. "Papa," he whispered drowsily. Rosa looked up sharply. Her eyes widened when she saw Alexander standing there, tall and imposing in his tailored coat. She shifted, almost guiltily, as though she'd been caught trespassing in a place her heart didn't belong. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, starting to rise. But Matthew clung to her arm. "No, don't go." The words hit Alexander harder than he expected. They weren't defiance, not really. They were fear. Fear that the one person who had given him warmth in the night would be taken away. And in that moment, Alexander realized something he had never let himself face before: his billions could buy anything in the world, except this. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Rosa's hands trembled as she gently placed the toy figures back on the carpet. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet the piercing eyes of the man who owned this mansion, the man who signed her modest paycheck, the man whose reputation commanded respect across continents. Alexander stepped into the room, his polished shoes making almost no sound against the carpet. His towering presence made the space feel smaller, yet he didn't speak right away. Instead, his eyes fell on his son, who was still curled against Rosa's lap, refusing to let go of her hand. "Matthew," Alexander said softly, his voice rougher than he intended. "It's late." The boy blinked at him, and for a fleeting moment, something passed between father and son: hesitation, distance, a yearning that neither knew how to bridge. "I couldn't sleep," Matthew murmured. "Sir," Rosa said quickly, her voice low but steady now, "I only meant to help him rest. He has nightmares sometimes, and—" "You're not his nanny," Alexander cut in, sharper than he meant. The words sounded harsher in the quiet room, and Rosa flinched. Matthew's small voice rose, insistent. "She helps me more than anyone else. Please, Papa, don't be mad." Alexander felt a stab of something deep, painful, and humiliating. His son was defending the maid, not him. He was the father, the protector, the provider, and yet, when Matthew woke trembling from bad dreams, it wasn't his arms the boy sought, but hers. The irony was unbearable. "Go to bed, Matthew," Alexander said after a pause, gentler this time. "We'll talk tomorrow." But the boy clung tighter to Rosa's sleeve. "Only if she tells me a story first." For a moment, Alexander almost said no. Almost reasserted the authority he had built his entire empire upon. But something in the child's eyes, a mix of defiance and pleading, stopped him. He gave a short nod. "One story. Then bed." Rosa hesitated, clearly unsure if she was crossing a line, but when Matthew nestled closer, she began. Her voice wove through the room like soft music. She told a story about a little bird who had lost its way in a storm, frightened and cold, until it found shelter beneath the wing of another bird that wasn't its parent but cared for it all the same. By the time she finished, Matthew's breathing had steadied, and his eyes had closed. The boy drifted into sleep, still holding her hand. Alexander swallowed hard, watching them. He had spent fortunes on doctors, tutors, and programs meant to build resilience in his son. Yet this simple act of kindness, of presence, had done what all his money could not. "Leave him," Alexander said quietly. "Come with me." Rosa carefully slipped her hand from Matthew's grasp, covering him with a blanket before following Alexander out of the playroom. Her steps were cautious, every motion respectful, as though she were walking a line between duty and dismissal. In the hallway, Alexander turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. "How long has this been going on?" She clasped her hands together. "Since I started, sir." "The boy, he gets lonely at night. Sometimes he wakes up crying, calling for his mother. The nanny doesn't always come. So you took it upon yourself," Alexander finished, his voice low. Rosa lifted her chin slightly, surprising him with her quiet courage. "He needed someone. I couldn't ignore that." For a moment, Alexander only stared at her. She was not like the people he was used to, those who sought his approval, his money, his influence. Rosa spoke plainly, without calculation. And perhaps that was why her words unsettled him. "You understand," he said finally, "that I pay you to maintain this household, not to—" his voice trailed off, because the truth pressed against his chest like a weight, "not to love my son." Her dark eyes softened, but her reply carried no hesitation. "Some things you can't pay for, Mr. Grant." The words struck like a blow. He should have been offended, but instead, he felt exposed. Stripped of excuses. He turned away, pacing slowly down the corridor. His mind was a storm. For years, he had convinced himself that providing materially was enough. That love could be outsourced, just like tutoring or cooking or security. Yet here was a maid, someone society would dismiss as insignificant, doing what he, with all his power, had failed to do. He stopped abruptly, facing her again. Why what, sir? Why do you care?" His voice was almost desperate. "You're not family. You're not obligated. So why?" Rosa's answer was simple, but it carried the weight of truth. "Because every child deserves to feel safe. Every child deserves to be loved. And if I can give him even a little of that, then I will. It's not about obligation. It's about humanity." Alexander's throat tightened. He had heard investors pitch billion-dollar ideas with less conviction than this woman spoke with now. For the first time in years, he felt small, not in the way of weakness, but in the way of realization. The empire he had built, the fortune he had amassed, seemed meaningless compared to what Rosa had given his son: comfort, warmth, a safe place to rest his heart. The hallway fell silent. Alexander rubbed a hand across his face, trying to mask the emotion threatening to surface. "Get some rest," he said at last, his voice softer. "We'll discuss this in the morning." Rosa bowed her head slightly. "Yes, sir." As she disappeared down the hall, Alexander lingered, caught in the quiet echo of her words. Humanity. That night, he did not retreat to his master suite with its sprawling balcony and silk sheets. Instead, he stood at the doorway of the playroom, watching his son sleep peacefully under the glow of the lamp. Rosa's story still seemed to hang in the air, wrapping the boy in invisible safety. And for the first time in years, Alexander asked himself a question he had never dared to before: what kind of father did he want to be?